2022. What a year.
A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
Russian forces today launched the largest wave of missiles and drones in weeks.
Prices continue just to skyrocket. Any relief in the near future?
Vote for me, President of the United States. I am Brent Peterson.
You look lonely. I can fix that.
Now we both look Asian. He raving and I'm drunk. I got that shit in my cup. You know what I'ma do to you? I could get real used to you. Go.
I'll be honest, can't say I'm sad to see it go. But, as hectic as this year has been, I did manage to squeeze in some reading time between the economic collapse and the plague. And to my surprise, I actually completed my reading goal of reading 50 books this year. I actually read 65 books, and some of them were pretty good, which has prompted me to make this video. Now, I did read some manga and short stories this year, but I won't be including them on this list. Not because I don't think those should count towards your reading goal, but just because I want to have more traditional books making up this list. And remember, these are all just my opinions, so don't yell at me in the comments. Deal? Alright, without further ado, let's get started.
Oh, let's go! That's class!
I want to kick this list off with some honorable mentions. And these first two I'm mentioning are basically outside of the list entirely. And those are 1984 and The Hobbit. Obviously two of the greatest books ever written, and deserve to be atop many top 5 lists, but I'm keeping them off of my list for the sake of entertainment. I think it's a bit of a cop-out to put two of the greatest books ever written on a yearly top 5, just because I happened to read them for the first time this year. And honestly, there's not much I can say about them that hasn't already been said many times over. So yes, they're both incredible works of literature, but putting them on a yearly top 5 just feels disingenuous. I want to introduce you to books that maybe you haven't heard of, and expand your TBR in a direction that you weren't expecting. And in the spirit of that, I will be keeping this list free from all-time classics. And with that spiel out of the way, I have a couple more honorable mentions that may interest you. The first is Troy by Stephen Fry, an incredible and delightfully entertaining retelling of the Trojan War through a sarcastic and sardonic lens. This is the third book Fry has done on various aspects of Greek mythology, and I highly recommend checking this one out if you're into Greek mythology or just history in general. The only reason Troy is not in the top 5 is because this kind of book may not be for everyone, and also it involves a large cast of characters over a very long period of time, and the story can become a little muddled when you're trying to follow so many people through so many events over the course of one book. But nonetheless, it's still a very fun read, and a great way to learn about a topic that is typically pretty challenging to digest. And then my last honorable mention goes to Black Flame, the third book in the Cradle series by Will Wright. Jeez. Cradle is a progression fantasy about a young man learning to master the sacred arts and propel himself towards an unknown destiny. I know it's odd to give so much praise to the third book in a series without having first talked about any other books in the series, but reading Cradle feels like watching an anime or reading a manga just without the visuals. You have arcs, and every book leads into the next basically seamlessly, and Black Flame really feels like where the anime starts picking up speed, like Orlong Park in One Piece or the Tross series in Attack on Titan. It's where the series really gets its legs and you feel the anticipation of what's about to come, and you don't want to stop reading until you finally get that payoff. Now, unfortunately, Cradle is not an anime, it's a 12-book series, so the payoff is quite a ways away. But regardless, Black Flame is still amazing and deserves an honorable mention on this list. So with the honorable mentions out of the way, here we go, the big boys, the top 5 books I read in 2022.
Favorite candy? Reese's Pieces or them Lifesaver gummies. If you give me a bag of them, they're gone.
Coming in at number 5 is Tender is the Flesh by Augustina Bastarrica. I really hope I said that right. I listened to the Google pronunciation like 6 times.
Bastarrica.
Now this is a grisly and disturbing read. Tender as the Flesh takes place on a near-future Earth where animal meat has become unconsumable due to a virus that infects the entire animal population. As a result, humans have begun raising, breeding, and slaughtering specialty meats. And yes, your morbid senses are correct. Specialty meat is human. The meat industry has transitioned from animal meat into human flesh. But what's so interesting about Tender as the Flesh is that this is not a conspiracy hidden by the government. No, the world at large knows that this is what's happening. And it is fascinating how believable this societal change is portrayed. Humans, people, are bred for slaughter, and this just becomes widely accepted in this world. There are laws and regulations surrounding this industry to give it the impression of being humane, and it's really terrifying when the wheels start to turn in your mind and you realize this is how this scenario would actually play out if it were to happen in real life. No matter how disturbing or how abominable a practice, if it's accepted as commonplace, we as humans have the ability to overlook it and it becomes mundane, even if the reality is far from that. Now I know you're probably like, damn, this dude just spoiled the whole book. But no, actually, that's just the setup premise, and you learn all that in chapter 1. I don't even want to mention the main story because spoiling any aspect of that would be a disservice to potential future readers of this book. This is a near perfect book in my mind, but I do have to warn you that this book will not be for everyone. I've heard from many people that this book has made them physically ill, and it is a truly disturbing world to be brought into. So a warning, if you plan on checking this book out, have a strong stomach. I ended up going a little longer than I expected for just number 5, so let's not dally any longer. Let's get into my number 4 pick, which is Hell's Reach by Aaron Dembski Bowden. Now, before we talk about this one, let me just make sure Drake's not anywhere watching, because I promised him I wouldn't make any Warhammer videos on this channel, but I think I can make an exception here. Now, before you berate me in the comments talking about what the hell is a Warhammer and why are there 40,000 of them, Warhammer 40k is a grim dark sci-fi set in the 41st millennium, so the year 40,000. Basically, everything sucks in 40k. Scientific progress has grinded to a halt. There are elves running about skinning people and turning them into couches. Humans span the galaxy, but they are all religious zealots and worship a literal corpse sitting in a chair. Everything blows in 40k, but that's the appeal of it, and it is endlessly entertaining. And what's great about Hell's Reach is you don't even have to know anything about 40k to enjoy it. At its very core, Hell's Reach is a story about a city under siege. Humans trying to hold out against an endless tide of orcs. It's basically Helm's Deep, but in a sci-fi setting. It is so much fun to read, and the non-stop tide of orcs, the ever-dwindling resources, and crumbling defenses will keep you entertained until the very end. I love a good siege, and this has it all. Limited resources and ammo, valiant last stands, heroic charges into enemy line, strategy, betrayal, nerves breaking in the face of unbeatable odds, last-minute reinforcements, all of these efforts driving the story, and yet still there is this bleak chasm that our characters are being forced into by the ungodly massive army of orcs, or an orc-wa, if you are familiar with the setting. And while you don't need to know anything about 40k before reading this book, it does give you a brief insight into some of the major factions if you find yourself wanting to learn more about the setting after reading it. You've got Space Marines, Orcs, Mechanicus, Imperial Guard, Black Templar, as well as some very interesting characters if you find yourself wanting to take a deeper dive after the book is over. And if you don't care about learning more about 40k after reading Hell's Reach, that's fine too. You still get a great story and a thrill of a read. And if all of that didn't sell you on Hell's Reach, just look at this cinematic.
I am a weapon in the eternal crusade to forge humanity's mastership in the stars. But strength, purity, and wrath will not be enough. I will die on this world. I will die on Armageddon.
Pick number 3, my lord. Oh, okay, number 3!
Got a little excited about 40K there. Well, let's move on to my number 3 pick, which is a much smaller story. A story from Shirley Jackson, who is becoming one of my favorite authors. And of course, I am talking about We Have Always Lived in the Castle, a book I've already made a video about. In fact, you can click on it here if you're interested in watching it. But I'm still going to give a brief explanation here as well. We Have Always Lived in the Castle is a beautiful exploration of coping mechanisms and the extents that we can go to warp our own reality, to make it into what we want to believe is the truth. Reality is whatever you want it to be. You see what you want to see, and a mentally unwell person can see the world quite differently than someone else. But Jackson explores the ideas that just because the collective is the majority, that doesn't always mean the collective way of thinking is the right way to think. In fact, groupthink can be just as unhealthy as self-delusion. I cannot stress enough how much I love Jackson's writings, and I implore you to read this book for yourself and develop your own love for it.
My hair does not require trimming, you lunkhead. What?
Now we're getting into the big dogs, the top 2. Number 2, Swan Song by Robert McCammon. This is actually the book we read for the book club in the month of December. So if you're interested in a more extended discussion of Swan Song, we've got you covered. But of course, I'll give you some information about it here as well. Swan Song follows several groups of survivors and how they have to survive a nuclear apocalypse in the wasteland that is the United States. And just as their reality has changed, so too do their bodies begin to change. Now, I don't want to give too much away in the terms of plot, not only because this is spoiler free, but also because this story is an experience in and of itself. A literal page turner. I could not put this book down once the plot got rolling. This has to be one of the best character studies I've ever read, and you get that for not just one, but multiple characters in the story. I never expected a slice of life story about characters living in a nuclear wasteland to blow me away. Bad pun. Swan Song is just one of those stories that will stay with you for years after you have read it. It is just that good. Now, same as Tender as the Flesh, this is a disturbing story at times and does not shy away from topics and actions that may make some readers uncomfortable. So I would say trigger warning to those of you that wish to read Swan Song, but for those of you with the nerve to make it through, you will have read a masterfully told story that'll leave you wondering why it's not more popular despite its age. If you can handle some violence and gore, please do yourself a favor and read Swan Song. Plus, it's on Kindle Unlimited, so if you already have that, it's free.
You take $500,000 or dinner with Jay-Z?
Man, give me $500,000.
All right, we've made it to the end. To number 1, my favorite book of 2022. And I'm giving that honor to We Are Legion, We Are Bob by Dennis Taylor. This pick might seem baffling. The rest of this list has been pretty heavy and serious stuff, but god damn it, if I am not an absolute dweeb to my core. I love sci-fi, and a complete bonkers sci-fi concept executed to absolute perfection just makes me smile inside, and the first book of Bobiverse does that for me. We Are Bob's concept is this. A guy from our time, or close to it, is cryogenically frozen upon death. He wakes up at some point in the future and realizes his consciousness has been transplanted into a self-replicating space probe, whose goal is to search the stars for potential planets for humans to inhabit. And I love this concept. It is so fun and unique, and of course there's a lot more to the story than what I've discussed, but this is spoiler-free, so I won't mention too much more about the main plot. But just imagine if you were to make a copy of yourself, and then a copy of that copy, and a copy of that copy, and so on and so forth. How long until minute differences between these copies become so exponentially large that you wouldn't even be able to recognize a future copy of yourself, even though it is you? And what happens when these copies go out into the universe and all have unique experiences and change and grow in ways that the original you can't even fathom? And time passes and you have your own experiences and grow and change. And then somewhere out there among the stars, you meet a copy of yourself. And now it's its own being that started off as you, literally you, but it has grown into its own person. Well, person, so to speak. It's a space probe. It has grown so much that you can recognize them, as independent from yourself. They are Bob, you are Bob. But in their own way, they're not the same Bob as when they started, and neither are you. And the exploration of this concept is done so well that I cannot help but give this book my #1 spot. Not to mention, for those of you that enjoy listening to books, We Are Legion, We Are Bob is performed by the legendary Ray Porter, who did Project Hail Mary. And his cadence and delivery is outstanding. It really gives the story another layer of life to it. And this is a book that I can recommend to everyone. And I do. Read it, enjoy it, experience it, come back, let me know what you thought about it, your likes and dislikes. I'd love to converse with some other people that have read the Bobiverse and see what their thoughts are.
Bye, buddy. Hope you find your dad.
So those were my favorite books from 2022. Not a bad lineup, if I do say so myself. But what about this year? 2023. What books do I want to read this year? My goal was 50 last year, but I actually don't want to have a numerical goal anymore. While I think having a number in mind can be positive, I personally want to change the type of goals I want to achieve as far as reading goes. So I have 2 goals in mind for 2023. One, I want to jump into the Cosmere. I have the first Mistborn trilogy and the first 3 books of Stormlight Archive, as well as a few of the standalones. So I think I can make a pretty good dent in the Cosmere in 2023. And my second goal is to expand the number of genres I read. You may have noticed from my scrolling list of books I read this year that it's mostly sci-fi, fantasy, horror, that kind of stuff. And I want to see what else is out there. I was really into mystery and thriller when I took a class on it in college, so I might jump back into that. Might even read a romance. Who knows? But what are your goals? Do you want to break triple digits? Do you finally want to read Wheel of Time? Or just get into reading in general? Let me know, and we can talk about it in the comments. Or, if you're so inclined, feel free to join the Discord. It's the best way to have an extended conversation with either myself or Drake. Other than that, I hope you have a swell new year, and I'll see you next time.